Voilà. Et puis, on va faire partager le bureau. Voilà. Et ben voilà. Ok. Je vais mettre ça de côté, là, comme ça. Et voilà, on va commencer. Alors, ce soir, on va commencer... Attendez, je suis un peu en avance là. Voilà. Voilà, c'est bon. Je vais faire que ça soit un peu plus grand. Ah, je sais pas encore. Oh, je vais faire poser 2 secondes. Ou bien, peut-être pas. J'ai oublié d'ouvrir les présentations. Bon, c'est pas grave. Je vais le chercher. Je vais la chercher, je dis. Alors... Voilà. Et ben... Une fois que ça s'ouvre. Alors, quelques petites annonces. The first composition is due Sunday the 18th. Sunday the 18th. So I'll have the information for that posted tonight. I'll also have the quiz posted tonight for this week. And, il y avait quelque chose d'autre. There was one other thing. I can't remember what it was. At any rate, something else will be posted. And when it is, you can find it in the module. So, and probably I'll do a little announcement because on BlazeView, because I usually do. So you can find it. Attendez. C'est bon quand même que ça s'agrandit comme ça, que ça s'agrandisse comme ça. Voilà. Et ben voilà. Alors, ce soir, on va faire la partie 3 du chapitre 4. On va parler des espaces verts. Et voilà. When we say green spaces, we mean more like municipal green spaces. Les espaces verts, we can use to mean municipal green spaces, parks, tree lawns, that kind of thing. It can also be in the larger sense, like nature in general. So, voilà. Il y avait rien que j'allais mentionner ici. A lot of these are cognates. Some aren't. Et puis, vous avez quelques trucs où quelques-uns où vous avez 2 possibilités. Alors, par exemple, pour une rivière, un fleuve, normalement, on parle d'un fleuve en étant un peu plus petit qu'une rivière. So normally, un fleuve is thought of as being a larger waterway than a rivière. People say fleuve for la Seine, for the Seine, for example, or for the Loire. And they would probably be more prone to say rivière for some of the smaller rivers. Voilà. Et puis une forêt, les bois, that's pretty much interchangeable. And it's actually just almost exactly the same terms as what we use in English, the same level of language and same I can't think of my word, same kind of torque to the word. Une forêt, just like a forest, les bois, like the woods. D'accord? So normally we think of une forêt as being bigger than a woods. Same thing in French, you would think of a forêt as being a little bit bigger than a woods. But sometimes you'll hear them interchangeably. So just about like rivière and fleuve. Voilà. Et vous avez aussi quelques possibilités d'activités qu'on fait sur l'eau, par exemple, ou dans la nature, comme aller à la chasse ou aller à la pêche. Et puis, voilà. As always, this stuff is kind of Normally, we used to memorize all these things. Your best bet nowadays is to review them enough so that you can jump into your activities. If you feel like you don't quite know them well enough, once you've done a little bit of an activity, then okay, go back and review a little bit more, and then jump back into your activities. Don't try to take it to a point where you just know them in and out, because as I've said before, and I'll say many, many times this semester, learning them as lists of vocabulary or learning them with flashcards is not going to help you use them in a context. So that kind of rote memorization, do just a little bit of it to get your feet wet and to refresh your memory, but then go use them in your activities in iLearn or play with the textbook activities. Sometimes those are assigned as homework and sometimes not. It depends on how many interesting things iLearn has for each individual partie. So you may have noticed that by now, that you sometimes have homework in the textbook and sometimes not. But jump into your activities, and then if you feel like, oh, I'm just constantly having to stop and look these up, okay, that means you need to go back and look at the list a little bit longer. But again, don't do it until you just know them backwards and forwards. You don't want to get that far with it. If you get that far with it, that's not going to help you learn them. So learning them the best is by using them in context, using them in your activities, letting your head kind of pay attention to what the other words are around them. And it teaches your head to kind of think on its feet, to mix about 4 metaphors at once. It gives your head a chance to depend on context rather than just, I didn't get that one memorized, so there's no way I'm going to know it. Voilà. So I'll keep saying that kind of stuff, and you'll get very tired of it, I'm sure. On va continuer alors. On va regarder la liste. Ici, vous avez d'autres mots de vocabulaire pour les espaces verts. La mer, la plage, etc. Pardon. Un jardin. Now, I want you to add to this idea not just a garden or a lawn, but a yard. D'accord? So if you tell somebody, oh, je vais aller jouer dans le jardin, or où sont les enfants? Ils sont dans le jardin. They're playing in the yard, not necessarily in the garden, but in the yard in general. Et puis, voilà. Vous avez quelques expressions avec faire that you learned way back when, and now you can add this one as well as aller à la pêche and faire du bateau, aller à la chasse. So there's some more activity expressions. As always, you have a key verb in your activity. If you don't remember how to conjugate, usually they're irregular verbs. In this case, faire. On the page just before this, we had a couple of expressions with aller. If you don't remember the verb, go back and refresh your memory just a little bit with the verb, and then come back and use it in context. D'accord? So we're going to come back and talk about the numbers after we do an activity. Alors, vous allez tourner s'il vous plaît à la page 172. Et vous allez associer chaque élément de la nature que vous allez entendre à son site naturel. D'accord? So you would hear, for example, for number 6, you would hear a beach. And you would say, oh, that's Daytona, not the Rockies. D'accord? Except for, instead of the beach, you would hear it in French. Alors, pour numéro 1, entendez bien, écoutez bien. Qu'est-ce que vous allez me donner pour une montagne? Une montagne. So again, pause if you need to before we say the answer. The answer in this case, le mont Everest. N'est-ce pas? Le mont Everest. Numéro 2, un fleuve. Un fleuve. Alors bien sûr, c'est le Mississippi, n'est-ce pas? C'est le Mississippi, le fleuve Mississippi. Numéro 3, qu'est-ce que vous allez me donner pour une forêt? Une forêt. Et là, vous avez la forêt de Sherwood, n'est-ce pas? Like from Robin des Bois, Robin Hood and the... I started to say Robin Hood and the Seven Dwarfs. That's not right. Robin Hood and his merry men. Alors, Sherwood Forest, la forêt Sherwood, contre les chutes de Niagara, pardon. The falls, n'est-ce pas? We didn't have that word in our list, but now you have it. Yay! Same thing with vallée, for example, right? Numéro 4, alors, un lac. Un lac. Alors, bien sûr, vous avez lac Erie, n'est-ce pas? Lac Erie. Numéro 5. Qu'est-ce que vous allez me donner pour une mer? Une mer. Alors, bien sûr, c'est B, Méditerranée. Oh là là! Oh no! I froze. Uh-oh. Please don't freeze. That's actually the first time that's ever happened. I always think that my computer's going to freeze during the, actually, it did freeze last week, come to think of it. I always think it's going to freeze more than it is, but that time it unfroze, so yay, we'll cross our fingers. Alors, la mer, la Méditerranée, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 6, une plage. Une plage. Oh, I gave this one away. I didn't mean to do that. Alors, Daytona, n'est-ce pas? C'est Daytona. Très bien. Alors, pour partie B, même chose un peu. Vous allez dire où est-ce qu'on fait chaque activité. Vous allez entendre une activité quelconque. Vous allez choisir où la faire. D'accord? Pour numéro 1, où est-ce qu'on va pour aller à la pêche? Où est-ce qu'on va pour aller à la pêche? On va sur un lac, n'est-ce pas? On va sur un lac. Numéro 2, pour faire la randonnée, où est-ce qu'on va? Où est-ce qu'on va pour faire une randonnée, pour faire la randonnée? À la montagne, n'est-ce pas? À la montagne. Numéro 3, où est-ce qu'on va pour faire du bateau? Où est-ce que vous allez faire du bateau? Sur une rivière, n'est-ce pas? Sur une rivière et non pas dans une ferme. Numéro 4, où est-ce que vous allez pour aller à la chasse? Où est-ce que vous allez pour aller à la chasse? Dans les bois, n'est-ce pas? Dans les bois. C'est très bien. Alors, pour commencer un tout petit peu avec les numéros, on va aller en arrière. 2 secondes. So, to refresh your memory, I wrote down some page numbers. I'll try to remember to put these in the module in case you need them. But basically, to go back and review your numbers, you need to go to, in fact, let me go ahead and put them in a sticky. And then I'll probably remember to put them on the module that way. There we go. Alors, voilà. So for numbers 0 through 20, you want to go to page 20 in your textbook. For 0 through 60, you want to go to page 19. That doesn't make sense. Page 10, sorry. Page 10. I can't read my writing. Pour 60 à 100, you need to go to page 35. And then today what we're doing are the numbers greater than 100, which are of course on page 171. Okay? So if you need to go back and review those, do so. The stuff from today is actually relatively simple compared to what you did already. D'accord? So we're going to look at this in the PowerPoint. There's just a couple of things I want to mention. In your head or in your book or in your notes or whatever, put a star next to the 100 versus the plural hundreds. D'accord? The same thing with 1000. Put a star next to 1000. D'accord? And what happens with these is, for 100 anyway, if it's just 100, you're fine. You're not going to add anything to the 100 because it's just 100, right? It's not plural. As soon as I get into 200, 300, 400, etc., I'm going to put an S unless I have something coming up afterwards. D'accord? Alors 200 avec S, 250, pas d'S. Ok? 300 avec S, 375, blablabla, 375, pas d'S. Okay? So something's coming afterwards, I'm not going to put the S. Now, if you stop and think about it, how often do you spell out numbers in English, not very often. So on the quiz, for example, and on the test, I will not be too worried about this S rule. However, you should know it because you know whoever you have for your next French course might be a little pickier about it. Also on iLearn is going to be picky about it. So it's a good thing to be aware of. However, it's not going to block comprehension if you accidentally put an S wrong or miss an S when you should have one if you're in France and you happen to be spelling out numbers. Because if you think about it, the number of times that we spell out a number is relatively minuscule compared to when we just use numbers and we're just using the digits or saying the number out. And of course, when you say it out, you can't tell if there's an S there or not, right? So don't be too worried about them. That is, don't beat yourself up if you miss the S when the S is there, when the S isn't there. Just try to get it as best you can. And then, as I said, I'm not going to be quite as concerned with that on the quiz and on the test as iLearn probably will. But it's still a good thing to be aware of for your future French courses. Then look at what happens with mille. Mille never takes an S, regardless of whether it's plural or singular or what comes afterwards. So mille is very nice to you, right? Million works almost like cent, d'accord? Except that if it's singular, no S. If it's plural, go ahead with the S, and it doesn't matter what comes next. Milliard works the same way as million, okay? So the pickiest one is cent, by far. D'accord? And then the second place in pickiness, I guess, is mille. So just don't put an S on mille ever. D'accord? Voilà. On va faire la présentation alors. Et ben voilà. Oh, je voulais qu'on fasse. I thought they had a number thing. I was thinking. Okay, well that's alright then. There's another place I want to go practice these. So. Attendez. Oh, I didn't cue these up. Very bad, girl. Bad. I didn't cue those up. Bon, ben, vite fait, je vais voir si j'ai cherché si j'arrive à trouver. So, bear with me one moment. Should have queued this up. I thought that I had. C'est affreux. There's kind of a dearth of activities that have to do with numbers anyway. But we'll see if we can get anything. Alors, ça ne va pas être forcément dans la grammaire. Hein? This is why I should have queued it ahead of time. It's relatively difficult to find number activities on their own. Well, I'll try to find a couple for you guys to have on the module then, and we'll just go on with our activities in the book. Voilà, c'est ça que je voulais. Another thing then, while we're talking about these, that I wanted to mention was all of these numbers. There are a couple of big differences between when you do numbers in French and when you do numbers in English. One thing is that our decimal equals their comma and vice versa. Okay? So, okay, I'll put English decimal equals French, comma, French decimal equals English, comma. D'accord? By what do we mean by this? English decimal equals a French comma. That is, for example, if I have a oh, crazy. I'll do this one. Ah, d'accord. Okay. So, a price, for example, in something in the States where I would have $500.50. Look at where my decimal is, right? In Europe, this would be, for example, d'accord? In France, that is, you would have a comma instead of the decimal, d'accord? By the same token, if I have a comma in English, the decimal, I should have done it the other direction, however it would be more clear. English comma equals French, oops, d'accord? So for example, if I'm talking about a bigger price or a bigger number and I have 131,472 somethings, right? In French, this is going to be 131,472, and look, I'm using a decimal instead of the comma. Now, the easiest way actually to tell these apart, and your head will just do it for you, is if there's a price or something that's big enough to have both incorporated. So if I have a car or something that's $13,690.72, for example. Alors en français, je dirais en euros, quoi, en France, on aura. And of course, the price wouldn't be the same. I'm not gonna go to the trouble to go to the to see what the rate of exchange is today, but this is what it would look like. And if you're shopping or something, you're out shopping for shoes or boots or books or cars, your head will look at this and your head will figure it out. Don't worry. Your head will see that little space and it will understand intuitively what this number really is saying. Okay, it won't be too troubled about the comma and the decimal. So that's just one interesting thing. D'accord? Alors, l'autre chose que j'allais mentionner, the other thing I was going to mention about numbers in particular, is actually a similarity. So even though we're using a decimal in between our units, or in between our trios of numbers, this idea of 3 and then 3 and then 3 is the same as what we would do in English. So in English I would say 1,398,423, right? And in French I would have the same exact thing. 1,398,423. Okay? And aside from needing to remember that the decimals become commas and vice versa, the cool thing about it is it's working exactly the same way as it does in English. I count in threes, right? So if I have a number here, 430, for example, 430, go. As soon as I make that number a little bit bigger, par exemple 1430, I'm going to have a decimal. Then if I have 430, you see what's happening is these trios are working the same exact way as they do in English. So if then I had 680,430, d'accord? The same thing is happening, right? So by the same token, if I went up here and had an even bigger number, 71,398, 498, 423. Qu'est-ce que je fais là? 423. You see what's happening still. I'm still separating these trios with a decimal, but it's the same exact thing as what I would do in English. I would separate each trio of numbers. And if you think about it, when you're going through these and counting, so si j'avais par exemple 971 millions, par exemple, pardon, 398 423, I'm stopping in each case to take stock, kind of, right? Alors, 971 millions, right? Then I'm going ahead with my next trio, 398 000, n'est-ce pas? 423. Same thing down here then. J'aurai 680 430, oui. Une fois que j'ai quelque chose d'autre au début, là, alors, par exemple, 2 millions, right? And I'm stopping after that to take stock, tally up or get a breather, however you want to think of it. Then I'm going on with my next trio, 681 430. OK? Même chose alors, si on continue. 22, par exemple, 680 430. So same thing. As soon as I'm done with that first trio, or the first set, right? I'm going to stop. Million, 680 000, same thing. Okay? And on and on. D'accord? 722 millions, 680 430. And the same exact thing happens then if I have milliard. So milliard is the same as billion, right? 5 milliards, 722 millions, 680 430. Okay, do you see what I mean? So in each case, you're just going with the same format that we do in English. And when we're counting in English, we say 131,000, right? And then I can go on with my next trio. So I can kind of take a little pause there. I can stop and regroup a little bit. And within this trio, I use the same exact vocab as I would for this, right? I'm using hundred, tens, ones, hundreds, tens, ones, right? So I'm saying the same thing here. Hundreds, tens, ones, mille, hundreds, tens, ones, right? Tens, ones, million, hundreds, tens, ones, mille, hundreds, tens, one. Okay? So it's the same system all the way through. I just have a different word here, but it's the same way that we progress pattern-wise with our numbers. So it really won't seem like that big a deal as you're going through it. You do have to learn your vocab, especially your hundreds, right? And then you're pretty much set. Your head will grab onto this relatively quickly, okay, once you actually know your numbers themselves. So one of the reasons that you need to go back and review all of these numbers is so that you don't have to stop and regroup every time you're thinking about your numbers 1 through 10, etc. D'accord? Same thing here then. If you're in the middle of a big, huge, long thing, you don't want to have to stop and figure out, oh, how do you say 81 again? I remember that was really hard, or I remember that was weird, or whatever. You want to just be able to go through, okay? So as you jump in on iLearn and as we do our activities here during the recording, if it seems like you really need to go back and review these first, then just stop and go do that for a little while, and then come back and continue with the recording, or come back and jump in on your iLearn, so that you're not trying to make your head remember all of this old stuff at the same time as it's learning new stuff, right? Go back and review these things first to get your head in the context a little bit better and refresh your memory before you jump in on these things, okay? And then, of course, that being said, one more time, these patterns are exactly the same as we do. So don't overthink it. Just do what your tendency is going to be. Your tendency is going to be to match whatever we do in English with it usually. D'accord? Très bien. Alors, on va regarder les activités. The hardest thing about numbers usually is audio comprehension, especially if somebody's telling you a phone number or something like that. So that's a particularly good thing to practice, is your audio comprehension. And not only audio comprehension, but saying some of the numbers to yourself so that you get used to hearing them, you get used to how they're being formed, etc. Now, here, they're not showing you any decimals or commas or anything, right? You will see numbers written this way. But normally when people are writing by, writing out something longhand, they will use the decimals. D'accord? So it will look like this. Okay? Oftentimes, yes, in print, you'll simply see a space. Okay? So if you just see a space, no big deal. Treat it like your decimal or like our English commas. D'accord? And still go 3 by 3 using your patterns that we just talked about. D'accord? Très bien. Alors, attendez que je cherche. Activité D. D'accord? Activité D. Alors, ce que vous allez faire, c'est de choisir la date historique que vous entendez. D'accord? Je vais vous donner des dates. Je vais vous donner une date dans chaque cas. Vous allez choisir la date correcte que vous avez entendue. OK? Alors, pour numéro 1, 1789. 1789. So again, pause if you need to before you go on. Alors, c'est B, n'est-ce pas? 1789. D'accord? Numéro 2. 1944. 1944. 1944. Bien sûr, c'est A, n'est-ce pas? 1944. Numéro 3. 1829. 1829. 1829. B, n'est-ce pas? 1829. Numéro 4. 1669. 1669. 1669. D'accord? C'est A, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 5. 1066. 1066. 1066. A, n'est-ce pas? C'est très bien. Numéro 6. 1211. 1211. Bien sûr, c'est B, n'est-ce pas? 1211. 7. 1914. 1914. 1914. This is another example of you're needing probably to go back and review those other numbers, right? 14 versus 40. Okay? 8, numéro 8. 1704. Oh, j'ai mal écrit celui-là. 1767. 1767. C'est B, n'est-ce pas? 1767. Et en fait, je pense que j'ai mal écrit parce que ça a dû être 1777, je pense. Because 1700 doesn't work. 1767 doesn't work for the next part of the activity. Alors, c'est très bien. Regardez alors pour étape 2. Alors, dans l'étape 2, you have some important dates in French history. Chiefly. Some of them actually correspond to things that were important in our history as well. So, number 1, qu'est-ce que vous allez me donner? Les premières batailles de la Première Guerre mondiale commencent dans les montagnes d'Alsace. Alors, la Première Guerre mondiale. Qu'est-ce que vous me donnez? So this is going to be choosing between the ones that we just chose in between each pair, right? So this one happens to be B, 1914. 1914, pardon. D'accord? 1914. Numéro 2. René de la Salle, explorateur voyageur français, explore le fleuve Mississippi. Il l'a fait en 1669. 1669. D'accord? Les forces alliées attaquent les plages de Normandie. Les forces alliées attaquent les plages de Normandie. Moi, je dirais embarque sur les plages de Normandie, mais voilà. Alors, 1944, n'est-ce pas? 1944. Le jour J, oui. You guys know about D-Day, right? So D-Day in French, c'est jour J. Oh, qu'est-ce que je fais? N'est-ce pas? Jour J. Voilà. Numéro 4. Le fleur de lys devient le symbole de la noblesse française. Le fleur de lys devient le symbole de la noblesse française. Vous savez ce que c'est qu'une fleur de lys? J'aurais dû chercher ça, mais j'ai pas fait. Attendez. Fleur de lys. Oh. Oh là là, Suzanne. Oh là là. Voilà. Voilà, c'est bien. Fleur de lys. D'accord? Everybody should recognize that, right? So this wasn't always the symbol for French nobility. When did it become the symbol for French nobility? En 1200. D'accord? And I am going to talk a little bit about this difference in how to say these bigger numbers in a moment too. Another difference. Numéro 5, la conquête de la campagne anglaise par Guillaume, duc de Normandie. La conquête de la campagne anglaise par Guillaume, duc de Normandie. Ça, c'est la même date que la bataille de Hastings. So if anybody knows about the Battle of Hastings, it's the same. That's basically when William the Conqueror, right, was considered to have won against or started the big onslaught dans la campagne anglaise. Alors, 1066. D'accord? Le marquis de Lafayette traverse la mer Atlantique pour soutenir les rebelles américains. J'arrive pas à lire aujourd'hui. I'm so tongue-tied today, I don't know my problems. Le marquis de Lafayette, voilà, traverse la mer Atlantique, voilà, pour soutenir les rebelles américains et leur révolution. Alors, quand est-ce qu'il a fait ça? 1777. 1777, d'accord? Vous avez deux gros indices ici, américain, révolution. 1777, d'accord? So, as I said, we're going to talk just for a moment about voilà. The difference between saying these numbers out. Now, I happened to go ahead and just say these all out in kind of the most proper way, pour ainsi dire, so to speak, when we were doing the activity, partly because as I was writing the numbers out, that's what the script was doing. So I kind of stuck to that as I was reading through them. However, normally, when we have a number, for example, how about the Pilgrims? So Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, 1620, right? And listen to how we said that, 1620. And we almost always say that date that way, right? The same thing if we say 1944, the year of D-Day, right? 1944, 1812, 1066, justement, Battle of Hastings, right? We have a tendency to use our tens vocab for the first part, and then say the second two in its own grouping as well, in the tens grouping again, right? Instead of saying 1066 or 1812 or 1944, d'accord? Now, even though our book pretty much focuses on saying these out, let's take 1944 as an example. So the way we just said it was 1944, we broke it in half. The book wants you to say 1944, right? And I'm going to tell you 99% of the French people that you talk to are going to say 1944, which is very similar to how we do it. Now, we don't say 100, usually. Usually we don't say 1944. We might, right? 1812, we might. But normally we just say 1944, 1812, 1620, right? So that's one difference. But aside from putting this son in there, it's the same system as what we were just using. 1944, je sais pas, 1865, for example, etc. So yes, you should know both ways of saying these. If iLearn seems to be counting you off when you use the more everyday version, which is what I'm calling this, 1944, for example, then you can opt for this. And if anybody wants to shoot me an email, if iLearn is being particularly picky about this, then yell. I haven't had a chance to go look at any of the activities to see what they're expecting you to say. Basically, they're only showing you this in our book, though, right? So bear in mind, you can also say them this way, and on the quiz and on the test, for me, you can do them either way. Now, I will say that most of the time for dates, people are going to use this format. So instead of 1944 or 1944, if I'm counting something, then I have more of a tendency to go ahead and say 1944. D'accord? I might say 1944, but I'm probably going to have more of a tendency to say it first. Say the former, but they're more or less interchangeable. With a date, 99.99999% of the time, French speaker is going to use the second version. 1944. D'accord? 1066. They might not say 1066. I'm going to say 1066, but for these others, I'm going to go ahead and say 1620, n'est-ce pas? 1944, 1865. Pardon, 1865 c'est ici, 1812 c'est ici, n'est-ce pas? Voilà. Ah, j'ai mis 1944 deux fois. Bon ben, I don't know what are the dates we want to refer to. How about, d'accord? Oh, je dis, si, ça va. Alors, 1789, ouais, on dirait. So you have two versions here too. 1789. Oui. Or, j'ai poussé ça un petit peu. Ou 1700. Oh, 600. Oh, voilà. C'est très bien. Okay. So, just a side note. Do what you need to do to get the most points in iLearn, and if it looks like they're really being picky and not letting you use this second pattern at all, if somebody wants to shoot me an email, I'll go back and give everybody points on that. But you should be able to use both of these, but just bear in mind that most French people are going to opt for the second one in most situations, especially with dates. Okay? Voilà. Alors, on va continuer aux interrogatifs, n'est-ce pas? And of course we've spent way too much time on numbers, mais voilà. Alors, on va regarder les interrogatifs. Faut poser des questions, les mots d'interrogation, oui. Ok. Voilà. Alors, following words are commonly used in French to ask questions. Poser des questions. This is when we are aiming for specific information. You may remember way back when, and I didn't look those page numbers up, but I will try to as we proceed. You used ESCA and inversion before. Inversion, je vais faire une note 89, et puis ESCA, page 7. So we had ESCA on page 7, okay, and inversion on page 89. I'm going to go ahead and add that in my little notes. So let's go ahead and make this one a little bigger so that you've got this in the recording, if nowhere else. Right? So if we're doing yes-no questions, you have ESCA or inversion, right? ESCA is on page 7. Inversion is on page 89. D'accord? Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to ask for more information, okay? So before, when you were just using ESCA or inversion, it was just for a yes or no question, right? Now we're going to ask for more information than that, okay? And you can still use ESCA or inversion in every case. D'accord? On y va? So here's some examples. Où, quand, que, qui, combien de, comment, pourquoi, et quel. D'accord? Now, in your notes, one really important thing, I think, il va pas me laisser, voilà. In your notes for the interrogatives, we're going to go back one. Voilà. For all of these, they can all stand alone with your ESCA or inversion or whatever's coming next, except for combien de and quel, okay? So in your notes or in your head or somewhere, make a blank somewhere to remind yourself that combien de has to be with something. I'm going to put a noun in here. So just like in English, I can say, Joe ate a bunch of croissants. Oh, how many? Right? But if I'm asking how many in a more proper way, I'm going to say, how many croissants did he eat? How much money do you have? Etc. N'est-ce pas? So that's what this blank is hopefully going to do in your notes, is to remind you that combien de cannot stand alone. Okay? The same thing happens with quel. D'accord? Quel, right? Plus inversion or ESCA. Okay? Now here, you're going to see when we look at it a little further, quel is an adjective. So remember how you always have to make agreement with adjectives. The same thing happens with this adjective. It just happens to be an interrogative adjective. So I can say what for a general way of saying, what are you watching, right? And we might say, oh, a game show. We say, oh, which game show? Quelle émission? Quel jeu? N'est-ce pas? And I'm going to use quel with a noun. Okay, so in here, you're going to have a noun of some sort, because these can't stand alone. And with quel in particular, you're going to make agreement between the adjective and whatever noun you're talking about. So we'll see how that works in a moment. And that's another thing I meant to note, was that you should go back and look at your adjective endings if you don't remember exactly how adjectives work. Remember that you're always making agreement between number and gender, between your noun and your adjective, whatever adjectives are pertaining to your noun, right? So this is the same thing. This is an adjective, so treat it as such. If it's masculine singular, it's going to look one way. If it's plural feminine plural, it's going to look another way, etc. D'accord? So we'll see how that works as we go on. Voilà. Voilà. Combien de, and here you have an example of what I was talking about. Combien de vélos est-ce que vous avez? Right? Combien de can't stand alone. How many bikes do you have? If I don't have bikes in here, nobody knows what I'm talking about. D'accord? Que faites-vous ici? Que can stand alone. It's the hugest, most global interrogative that we have. What are you doing? What are you reading? What do you like? What did you do today? Etc. D'accord? Que. And I want to go back to here. This que, Q-U apostrophe, you guys should all know by now that if you have, let me just a separate one. Go. Everybody should know by now that if I have an E muet, which is what the E is on je, de, le, ne, me, se, te, and que, which is what we just were playing with, any of these E's in front of a vowel, I'm going to drop the E, right? And I'm going to do an apostrophe. Right. Okay. We'll just do this before a vowel. D'accord? So, that's where we get je, par exemple, j'aime, oui. je sais pas, l'affiche, for example. Whenever you're using a negative, je n'ai pas de je sais pas quoi, d'accord, etc., right? So the same thing is going to happen with que. Drop your E in front of a vowel and add your apostrophe. This should be almost automatic by now. Nobody should be getting tripped up on these mue at this point, okay? But if you need to go back and review it, go back and look at some of those. If you're not sure where to find some of this stuff, then somebody shoot me a text or something, and I'll find some page numbers or something for you, or some activities for you. But this should look familiar, definitely. And if it's not second nature yet, try to start getting it that way, right? As soon as I see a vowel coming up after one of these, I'm going to drop it and put an apostrophe. So the same thing happens with que. And we're going to see some other examples of this, but I'll go ahead and show you. Par exemple, que mangez-vous? What are you guys eating? D'accord? Or I could say, qu'étudiez. D'accord? Qu'étudiez-vous? Now these may sound funny, and it's true that a lot of the time with que we go ahead and use est-ce. That's where you get your idea of qu'est-ce que, that you've probably heard a lot before this and just didn't use yet. Or those of you who already have French, of course, you may have used it already as well. But when you have que on its own, if it's in front of a vowel, I'm going to drop it and add the apostrophe, just like I do with all of these other words, okay? So that's where they get this que apostrophe version here. Voilà. When qui is the subject of a question, it's immediately followed by a verb. When qui is a direct object, it's going to be used with est que or inversion. D'accord? This is one way to tell whether you're talking about a subject or a direct object. D'accord? On va regarder un exemple. Oh. No. Oh, I forgot. They're giving us pretty good examples here. We're just going to use those. Hello. Voilà. So, qui va à la campagne? Here, I've got a verb coming up right away. So, it's talking about a person. D'accord? Qui va à la campagne? Qui est-ce que tu regardes? Qui est-ce que tu regardes? Now, also, you have a subject right here. And you shouldn't have to stop and think about this being a direct object. You should understand what this is asking without it telling you necessarily. Who are you looking at? Who are you watching? D'accord? Qui aimez-vous? D'accord? So if I just have a verb, it's actually going with qui, and qui is my subject. Anything else is coming afterwards, chances are it's a direct object. Qui can also be the object of a preposition. D'accord? So this is sometimes difficult for us as English speakers because we have a tendency to put prepositions at the ends of sentences a lot more than we used to, right? So I might say, who are you going to the library with? Whereas in French I would say, avec qui tu vas à la bibliothèque? D'accord? Who are you going to give that to? Tandis qu'en français, je veux dire, à qui vas-tu donner ce cadeau, par exemple. Okay? So in these cases, you'll have to think the way we used to be supposed to speak and how we kind of are still supposed to speak, but we just don't do it anymore, where we go ahead and put a preposition in the front of the sentence. So here's an example. Avec qui est-ce que tu parles? With whom are you speaking, right? You probably more often say, who are you speaking with? Or who are you speaking to, right? Somebody's on the phone, who are you talking to? Et non pas, à qui est-ce que tu parles? Avec qui est-ce que tu parles? De qui parlez-vous? About whom are you speaking? So this probably sounds really stilted because we just really aren't super strict about this anymore, at least in American English. So in French, just remember that the rule that we used to have in English where you're not supposed to end a sentence in a preposition, still applies very, 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 very strictly. D'accord? Once in a great while, you will hear somebody say avec at the end of a sentence. More often than not, this is when somebody's speaking about food. Je sais pas, si j'allais peut-être faire des sandwichs ou quelque chose pour le déjeuner, et on va parler de ce qu'on va manger avec. What are we going to have with it? And I might put avec at the end. On va manger. Qu'est-ce que tu vas manger avec? D'accord? And I can leave avec hanging. So that's one example. It's not super proper, but it's happening more and more and more. And with qui and some other of these interrogatives that you'll see later, you almost never can leave. You'll almost never hear anybody, regardless of their education level or anything, leave that stuff at the end. They will go ahead and put it with the pronoun at the beginning of the sentence, with the interrogative. So try to just remember, never, ever, ever leave a preposition hanging at the end of the sentence in French, at least for now. Maybe in another 50 or 60 years you'll hear this more and more. I kind of hope not, but I'm a purist. Informational question words except for que can also be used alone. So for example, j'ai envie d'aller au lac. When? Quand? Just like I would say in English, right? J'ai envie d'aller quelque part. Where? When? So I can use these as one-word questions. I can also use pourquoi as a one-word question. I don't know if they're going to tell you that. They're not telling me that. I could say à quelle heure or quand to mean when. D'accord? À quelle heure is specifically what time, whereas quand can be referring to date, day, time, whatever. Okay? You answer questions asked with pourquoi, avec, parce que. So same thing in English. Why did you do such and such? Because. Because I wanted to. Because they told me I had to. Because it was time. Ou quoi que ce soit. D'accord? J'ai téléphoné à ma mère. Pourquoi? Parce que c'est son anniversaire. Okay? So you do have these counterparts that you should try to memorize kind of together in sets. And this is going to be pretty intuitive because you're used to saying because in English, so your head is going to want to have some kind of equivalent when you're speaking. And parce que tends to be pretty easy for us to latch onto as English speakers, so it's probably not going to pose too much of a problem. You've already seen and used quel before, and now you can see how to use it even further, and it can appear in front of être. So here's some examples. Quel âge as-tu? Right? Quel is agreeing with âge. What? Now I can also use quel with être and then a noun. Okay? So we're going to go back to my little note. And we're going to say, or, I'll make some space because that's confusing. There we go. Or, plus, être, plus, noun. Okay? So you can use it either way. Alors, par exemple, je pourrais dire quel cours préfères-tu? Or, let's say, quel est le cours que tu préfères? Oh, j'arrive pas à faire mes accents ce soir. Voilà. Okay, same thing. And it's just a difference of whether I want to use être. Quel est le cours que tu préfères? Quel cours préfères-tu? Même chose. Okay? And both of them are totally correct. So you'll see sometimes this and sometimes that, depending on what you're asking. Quels sont tes cours favoris, par exemple? Quelles sont les bonnes plages, par exemple? And then to ask what, you have a few different options. Now, these guys say that quoi is acceptable with family and friends. Honestly, I still don't hear it very often. So yes, you can use it, and it's not necessarily that somebody's going to go, oh my gosh, elle est si mal élevée, elle vient d'utiliser quoi dans ce contexte. They're not going to think, oh my gosh, you're so impolite. but you're just not going to hear it that often. I know they say you can use it here in the book, but err on the side of caution. Comment should be your go-to. Pardon, I don't hear that often either. Comment is what we hear most often when you want to say, pardon, what did you say? Excuse me? You didn't hear exactly what the person said. Comment. D'accord? Pardon, ça va aussi. Pardon is more often when you really are asking, excuse me, can you say something? Excuse me, can you help me with this? Or quelque chose comme ça. Mais comment? You can use pardon that way, but comment is usually kind of the default. And I would be very, very careful with quoi. Okay? Especially those of you who want to go ahead and study more French later. Don't get in the habit of using quoi in this way. You just don't hear it this way very much in French. Even with family members and friends. Almost everyone, I don't know, it just kind of strikes me funny that they're saying that you can use that at all, but go ahead and just stick with comment. That simplifies things for you anyway. You only have to remember one of them. So just use comment and you're safe all the time. Alors, voilà. C'est très bien. Alors, ce qu'on allait faire, c'était de réviser un tout petit peu avec I put a couple of interrogative review activities for you on, I guess we're actually not going to do that. For you on the, voilà. In the module. So use those, and if you want some more, I'm going to be looking for some more, so if you need to remind me or text me or email me or something, and I will post a few more on those. I don't have too many on my grammar page that still work. There are a couple of them that were dead that I was very disappointed about, but oh well. So I will search for a few more of those to put on the module for you, so keep checking back. And of course, your iLearn will give you plenty of practice on the interrogatives as well. And this is probably a good time to mention that as we get closer to the test, you'll find, you already know this with the quizzes, are going to more or less be the same kind of structure that you're used to with the iLearn activities and the textbook activities. The same thing is going to be true with the test. Okay, I'm not going to have some crazy activity on the test that you've never seen anything that worked like that before ever. So your best bet for most of your practice is still going to be iLearn and your textbook, partly because that way you're getting ready for the test and the quiz is the best, and partly because that's the vocab that you've already got, so they're not going to use any crazy vocab. That all being said, don't hesitate to go use outside sites if you just need a change of scenery. Those are excellent practice, especially those of you who continue on in French when you get into second year. You're going to have, of course, different books, etc., and your head is going to be more ready for looking at things in a different context if you've done some of this outside practice. And for that matter, well, you guys will probably be going ahead and going to 200 in the spring, but if anybody's wanting some stuff to practice over Christmas, for example, then yell, and I can give you some links about things to go practice just to keep reviewing all of your things from 101 and 102. And there again, it's really good to do that on outside sites so that you're as ready as possible for any kind of new book that they might need you to use for 201. Of course, you're still with us, you'll still be continuing on with liaison. But if you skip a year or two for some reason, or if you take it with another institution, you may be with a different book, right? So, voilà, it's always good to look at other resources to kind of keep your brain fresh. Alors voilà, c'est tout pour ce soir, et dans quelques moments, quelques instants, quelques heures, je sais pas quoi, vous aurez le quiz pour cette semaine. Vous aurez aussi les détails pour la composition. Et voilà. C'est très bien. Alors, bonne soirée, bonne continuation et bon courage. Salut!